Chairs. Some of y'all know Tim Cupid. He is really a dynamic guy. He came to Corinth a month or two ago, and I met him at the state meeting, and he said, I want to come to your camp and tell you about the state meeting. And if you've never been to a state meeting, this is the one to go to. He's really going all out. He's on a quest to go to every camp and tell about the state meetings. And I told him he lives in Brent. I said, do you know how far that's kind of 3.5? I want to come. I said, yeah, but you know, you got to work. I said, he said, I want to come, book it. So I booked it way back, and he's going to come next month. And he doesn't take up the full amount of time. And so I've arranged for another speaker that's, he wants his identity kept secret because if word gets out, we couldn't fill the room with all the people. And he's going to give a short talk next month to make up some of the time that Tim doesn't take up. So make sure you come next month and hear what Tim and this other speaker has to say. Tonight I'm glad to have our speaker back. He was here about 3 years ago. He's our local librarian, Brent Grisham, and he's taken our library to the next level here in Tippah County. And just to make sure he behaves, we have one of his work associates, Sheila Lance, that's going to go back and tell everybody if he messes up. And then doubly, we have his mother, Martha, who has been a registered nurse about 40 or 50 years. So if you have any health issues, I'm sure she'll take 30 minutes or an hour to go over anything with you. And if that's not enough, we have Larry Cochran, who's on the board of the library, to make sure he doesn't mess up either. So he's on his best behavior tonight. He talked to us last time, if you'll remember, about 3 years ago about the caning. That one of the significant things that happened in the House of Representatives or Senate, I can't remember which one, that was one of the factors that led on to the war, and did a great job then. And we're glad to have him back. I want to present our librarian, Brent Grisham.
I hope y'all clap when I'm done. I want to begin this evening by just thanking you for having me back. It's always a pleasure to come back to a place a second time around. Tonight I wanted to give you some insight into a variety of local happenings during the war. I've only used first-hand accounts to construct this program, so what you are hearing comes directly from the source. The local part of this might be a little bit deceiving. I have accounts from citizens living in and around Tippah County during this time period, but I also have accounts from local soldiers fighting elsewhere across the South and even in Gettysburg. But whichever form it takes, there's a common thread of Tippah County to it all. I've also peppered in a few little interesting tidbits about our area and our men during the war. Now, this is by no means an exhaustive presentation of Tippah Countyans during the war. It would take volumes and volumes and volumes of books to even begin such. But it does offer a broad overview of the action, so I hope you enjoy this. Some of you are going to know this information right off the bat, especially if you're a Tippah County. But one of 4 volunteer companies from Tippah County was named the O'Connor Rifles. I'm sure you're familiar. I don't know if you're familiar with who it was named after. Does anyone know who the O'Connor Rifles was named after? No one. Good. A Yankee. It was named after a New York attorney by the name of John Charles O'Connor. Now, we misspelled it. We called it O'Connor Rifles with 2 N's, but he only spelled his name with 1 N. But he happened to be a strong states' rights Democrat, and he was an attorney from New York, like I said. And he also successfully defended Jefferson Davis after the war on the charge of treason. So we had a little shout out to a Yankee tonight. We have 2 great diaries from men who fought with the O'Connor Rifles, which became Company B of the 2nd Mississippi Regiment, Army of Northern Virginia. The O'Connor Rifles fought at Manassas, Seven Pines, Sharpsburg, and the Cornfield to be exact, Gettysburg, and were part of the group that surrendered at Appomattox. Now, approximately 111 men from the O'Connor Rifles marched out on April 30th of 1861, but only 4 were there at the surrender. One of those 4 had been wounded 9 times, while another didn't even have a scratch on him. Now, the 2 men whose diaries we have, and we have these at the library, are John Buchanan, who kept his diary from July 4th, 1861 to July 9th, 1862, and Augustus L.P. Varon, better known as Old Ord. In fact, his book is called Old Ord's War Journal. John Buchanan's first diary entry is quite simple. All he says is, spent the 4th of July at Darksville, 5 miles from Martinsburg. Heard the Federals firing the salute of 33 guns, returned to camp near Winchester on the 7th. But his first major action took place at First Manassas. He writes on July 19, 1861, got breakfast, forded the river at 11 o'clock on our way to Manassas Junction. Marched last night until 1:30, lay down on the rocks, and slept till about day. On July 21st, he writes, cannonading by the enemy commenced at 7:30. We marched to the center of action immediately. 10% of the men in Company B was a casualty at Manassas. 1 in 10 were either wounded, captured, or killed. John Buchanan writes on July 22nd, rained all day, terrible times, dead bodies all around us. 2 days later, he writes, I am now on the spot where Thomas Peter Sargent and John Grace were shot, 11:30 at Sudley's Church, 35 miles from Washington. 250 of the wounded enemy. Saw an arm cut off Price Williams. And a week after writing of the rain and the dead bodies, he records only 4 words in his diary. Nothing of notice today. After First Manassas, there was a general sentiment across the South that this was going to be a very, very quick war due to the Confederate victory. But John Buchanan's diary never mentions what he thinks about the overall war itself and how fast it's going to last. He strictly lives in the moment of just rain and death. In fact, in cross-referencing some of these diaries, no one talked about after that first battle of Manassas. So it seems like it may have been more of a, I hate to make a broad generalization, but more of a politicians thinking the war was going to be quicker than the actual men who were fighting. As we all know, most days of the war, for most men involved, were days of just peace and solitude. Those days in the diaries can be just as interesting. On August 4th, Captain John Buchanan, who was paid $130 a month, wrote, a beautiful morning. Only 29 men report for duty. This is my birthday. 42 years old. Had apple tarts for dinner. Some days in his diary, he simply wrote the word nothing. And in almost every entry, the weather is mentioned. It appears to me that Virginia had the wettest summer on record in 1861. And that can be verified by Old Ord as well, because he writes, there is a lot of rain. It's raining. Thunder, rain. For weeks. I know every day for weeks it rained in Virginia. Another interesting thing John Buchanan said, it was on September 30th. J.J. Guyton left for Richmond. He sent $200 on to Elsie by him. Elsie must be John Buchanan's wife. Sent $200 back to her. Buchanan was also involved in the Peninsula Campaign. On May 5th, 1862, he wrote that they were camped near Williamsburg, had a little skirmish with federal forces at the fortification 2 miles from town. 2 of our side reported killed. The next day, he said, the morning's clear and fine. Still at camp 3 miles west of West Point, fight at Williamsburg yesterday, repulsed the enemy. We'd killed and wounded 100, took 12 pieces of artillery. 2 o'clock ordered into the line to meet the enemy. 4 o'clock now, he's writing this all the way as he's in the line. 4 o'clock now, in line of battle, awaiting orders. Reports say the enemy are landing forces at West Point. Reported skirmish with the pickets. Moved back 1.5 miles for the night. Got no rations today. The next day, 10 o'clock, now in the intended battlefield. Here scattering shots, 11 o'clock. A fight going on rapidly between us and the river. Several killed and wounded, numbers not known. Next day, left camp on picket at 2 o'clock. Marched 14 miles. Camped near the Raymond Key River. Weather fine, nightly cold. Now baking cornbread without sifting. Ate nothing but parched corn since yesterday morning. One of the great things about his diary, and I've got it up here, his family actually put it together, is in the back of it, he has sort of a ledger that he created and kept. It includes the deaths of men, where they were killed, where they were wounded, money that he borrowed and lent. He had a little bank operation or something on the side. And just listing men that he fought with and other just interesting details. Now, meanwhile, at home, and after the Battle of Shiloh, panic struck the people of Tippah County. In fact, one Ripley merchant by the name of O.R. Miller wrote to his brother T.M. and said, "Things are awfully squally here. I keep closed most of the time and have a notion to close altogether." At the time, Halleck could have taken Ripley, and for a short time it appeared that he would, but he concentrated efforts elsewhere, was later reassigned, and would, of course, be replaced by Grant. One of the many intriguing facts about Tippah County during the entire war is that it was overrun by both Confederate and Union troops, constant, back and forth, blue and gray. It was a perpetual changing of hands, constant. Neither side had complete control in Tippah County. And due to so many troops coming in and out of the county, food and war supplies were consistently being taken by both sides. Of course, the northern troops were more aggressive in their taking. I know we have an honorary Southerner, so don't take offense to any of this Yankee talk tonight. To highlight, and as a result, northern Mississippi and Tippah County in particular was known as a belt of desolation. Nothing here. To highlight this problem, in June of 1863, in just 1 month, 13 times troops came through Ripley, foraging whatever they could find, and only extremely isolated pockets of the county were untouched. And a lot of this capture of items is chronicled in a diary by Judge Orlando Davis. On June 29, 1862, he said 8,000 infantry, artillery, and cavalry arrived under General Rosecrans, Hamilton, Davis, Buford, Abbott, and Granger. Remained until Tuesday, July 1st, when they evacuated, burning their tents and stores. General Withers, with 2,700 men, was advancing from Tupelo and arrived on Wednesday and remained for 3 or 4 days. On this trip, few citizens were molested. Now, on a side note, General Rosecrans is one of the few Northerners cited in any diary or letter that was sort of talked about for his lack of extreme hostility in taking the goods in Ripley and Tippah County. In fact, when Rosecrans at one point was pushed into Ripley, some of the citizens made note about how accommodating he was to the town. Others were certainly not as nice as Rosecrans happened to be. And Judge Davis wrote about that. Battle of Corinth, Friday and Saturday, October 4th and 5th in 1862. Battle of Hatchie, Sunday, October 6th. Van Dorn retreated through Ripley on the 7th and 8th. Federal Army under Rosecrans entered Ripley Tuesday night, 12 p.m., October 8th. Colonel Lee of the 7th Kansas mustered his regiment in front of Spike's Hotel, called the roll, and then dismissed them, saying, quote, "Boys, do as you please." They sacked Spike's Hotel, taking spoons, knives, and forks, blankets, quilts, bacon, flour, salt, corn, fodder, potatoes, cabbage, etc. Broke the safe of Abraham and Company, took $2,000 worth of goods and $700 in money. On this visit of the Federals, every possible indignity and outrage was committed on the citizens, including robbery, burglary, arson, and theft. Houses were pillaged and robbed of every article of wearing apparel and bedding. Men were robbed of their money by robbers with pistols at their breasts. Women were robbed in the same way. Rosecrans was told of what happened during this time, and he tried his best to stop it, but it was really too late. On November 20th, 1862, more federal raiding happened to Judge Davis when, quote, "They took every horse and mule they could find. They robbed me of every grain of corn, every blade of fodder, and took all my potatoes. Colonel Lee made my house his headquarters and left Friday at 8 a.m. Christmas Day of 1862, he said of the Yankees, "On this trip, but little damage was done by them, as they remained but a short time. On this trip, they shot at me and took my gray horse." Of course, that's what we call the Christmas spirit. But the worst of it, according to Judge Davis, occurred on March 23rd, 1863. Colonel Prince and Major Blackburn with the 7th Illinois Cavalry came in at 1 o'clock and remained 24 hours, 500 or 600 strong. They came from LaGrange and returned to Salisbury. No portion of the Federal Army that had visited Ripley was guilty of such barbarities. They burned the north side of the public square and Parson Dancy's house. They fired my office in 2 places, but one of their officers put it out. They threw my law books out onto the street in a heavy rain and broke every sash in my window. Also broke up my furniture, burnt my papers. They broke up all the furniture in the stores and broke all the window glasses in the square. They took Jim Witten's family away in my wagon, stole my mule and harness, corn and fodder. But Old War's diary is probably my favorite that you're going to find. But his most interesting excerpts sort of come from Gettysburg. On July 1st, he said, "It's clear. The regiment returned from picket at 7 a.m. and stopped a short time to rest at Cashtown and get the rations cooked by those we left in camp. About 9 a.m. marched toward Gettysburg. We had no idea of a battle yet until we crossed a small bridge. We were halted, taken through the manual of arms by Colonel Stone, arms inspected and ordered to load at will. As we approached the town, we went through a wheat field on the right of the road to support a battery. Soon after, moved to the left of the pike. About a half-mile from town, we met the enemy, the 16th New York being the first we met. We were in a clover field on high ground, they in a cornfield 100 yards off in the hollow. We soon annihilated them. So one of their sergeants afterward told me, for we drove the remnant of them back. They fought well and fell mostly on the line they occupied." And he goes on to talk about how his regiment was completely reduced later in the day. The next day, all he writes is, "We were moved about 1 mile to the right of yesterday's battle and rested all day, gathering arms." One of my history professors at Delta State said, and I'm sure he was quoting Shelby Foote, I don't know where this quote comes from, but he said that every Southern boy's dream is to be a soldier waiting to make that final charge at Gettysburg, and be there with Pickett waiting on his command. Here's what Ord said about that day. About 7 a.m., the remnant of our regiment, gun strong, marched to the battlefield, and after the cannon ceased firing, we joined in making the last grand charge which was so disastrous to our army. We were on the right of General Heath's command and were in the thickest of the fight, where we lost all our men but one, either killed, wounded, or captured. I was badly wounded and in time was sent to David Island Hospital near New York, where I remained till November and returned to Richmond for exchange. Was furloughed, returned home for a year, and returned to the Army at Petersburg. On another side note, Ord's diary was compiled and worked on by Andrew Brown. Some of you will know who Andrew Brown is. He wrote the first history of Tippah County. It includes a ton of information on Tippah-Countians in the war. This whole back part is just a treasure trove. I'm sure your ancestors are in here somewhere. Okay, if you have a Tippah County connection, they're in here. And of course, this can be found at your local public library. Of course, Dr. Samuel Agnew has probably one of the most interesting Civil War diaries of any local man available. In fact, a book with his diary, part of his diary was published not too long ago. It's a compilation by Stephen Ash called A Year in the South, and it's about 4 lives in 1865. And it takes Dr. Agnew's diary and sort of just puts it in a sort of narrative form. But what I liked about Dr. Agnew's diary, of course, came from Bryce's Crossroads, where he lived, which, of course, back then with the old county lines, Bryce's Crossroads was just a half mile from Tippah County line. And this is what Agnew had to write about that. On June 8, 1864, he says, "There's been some excitement today growing out of the Yankee raid. Forrest has gone up. He passed up yesterday evening, and I learned today he's repairing the bridge across 20 Mile near Burris. Trains brought up his artillery to Baldwin last night and this morning. He evidently is striking towards Corinth as the point of danger. Our intelligence is that the Yankees are at Ripley. Yesterday evening, Rucker's brigade had a fight 4 miles south of Ripley. Our men retreated to Kelly Mill, and from thence they went to Baldwin. It is said a scout of Yankees were at Kelly's Mill today. I cannot learn certainly which way the Yankees are going. Some think they're moving towards New Albany, others towards Rienzi or Corinth. Their force is 7 regiments, infantry on Muddy, 2,500 cavalry, 250 wagons, 150 ambulances, and large quantities of artillery. It is thought they designed reinforcing Sherman. I rode over to Bryce's this evening. Mrs. B will not start to South Carolina until things grow quiet. Lee's victory in Virginia is confirmed. The fight was on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and was fought in 10 miles of Richmond. The Federals' loss in killed, wounded, and captured is 15,000. The next day, he says the news we had was that Rucker had gone with his brigade towards Rienzi. General Forrest, with his entire command, has gone towards Rienzi as well. The Yankees were reported to have gone in the same direction. We hence felt very easy. thinking that for the present we would not be troubled with Yankees. Late this evening, Thompson Phillips came over telling us that Oliver Nelson had sent word down that the Yankees were coming down the Ripley Road this evening, and it was not known whether they would go towards Baldwin or Guntown. June 10th, the battle raged long and doubtfully for some time in the direction of the crossroads. About 5 o'clock, the firing evidently drew nearer, and I was satisfied it was near Hollins. About 6 o'clock, to my surprise, shells began to fall in the woods where I was hid. At the time I first noticed them, I was near the Watson field, taking observations. Shells coming over rapidly with a whizzing noise, we deemed it prudent to get out of the way. Just as we were leaving the back of the field, I heard some persons talking near us. I supposed it was Pa conducting Mother and Nanny and came very near going to their assistance. But just then a shell came whizzing near them, cutting off a limb from a tree. As speedily as we could, we moved down. Saw Uncle Joe in the woods. He told me the Yankees were in our wheat field in thousands. It was then that I heard, just before I left the Watson field. He could give no intelligence from home. I was greatly uneasy. The battle evidently was raging from there. The battle was fought principally around the crossroads. 12 Yankees had come on a scout to Uncle Young's. They fired on him as he was leaving home. His fine clothing and hat was captured. He was taking them to a place of safety, but in the race lost them. The battle at the crossroads was very severe. The ground all around the crossroads is covered with the wounded and the dead. General Lee had a son killed. The enemy fought desperately, making a stubborn fight, but finally were driven back, and at last accounts the fighting was going on about our house. Forrest was in the front, pursuing with vigor. June 11th, he says, I was very anxious in reference to the family and came up on them cautiously. Find that the Yankees had been driven away, our once pleasant home a wreck. My heart pained me when I beheld the desolation wrought. The Yankees had taken away every ear of corn and every pound of meat, leaving us nothing to eat. That they had not eaten a bite since the previous morning. That the house had been plundered. I walked through the rooms and find everything turned upside down and nearly everything we had taken from us. Dead and wounded men were lying in the house. The walls of the house had been perforated by a good many canister and grape balls. One shrapnel struck the guttering on the south side of the dining room. On June 16th, he says, the stench of the dead is very unpleasant. Paul had the carcass of a horse burned a few days ago, but a small portion of the horse was unconsumed, and I suppose the unpleasant smell originates from that. I noticed down in Phillips Lane the grave of a Yankee with the hand projecting out. I think it's a white man, though the hand looks black. I think the enemy's dead are buried too shallow. The graves are not 2 feet deep, and very little dirt conceals them from the eye. Judge Davis himself makes some notes on Bryce's Crossroads as well, saying on June 11th, he says, at 4 a.m., General Sturgis's army reached Ripley on their retreat from Bryce's Crossroads. They were the most demoralized set I've ever seen in these parts. They rested here until after breakfast, when at 7 a.m. they were attacked by Forrest's pursuing cavalry, and the fight raged in and around the town for 2 hours. The Yankees were again defeated and left, scattering in every direction through the woods. They abandoned a portion of their artillery training in the northwest part of town in Miller's Field. Over 200 dead Yankees killed in the fight buried here. Besides, about 100 wounded were left behind. Every wagon, ambulance, and cannon was captured, 21 in all. But then about a month later, he says, the Federals came back to Ripley. Davis wrote, the Yankees were infuriated because of their former defeat here and came swearing vengeance on the town. 35 stores, dwellings, and church, including the courthouse, were burned. The south side of the square was fired by the cavalry in the morning. Mrs. Price's, Colonel Faulkner's, and Mrs. Ford's dwellings were burned. The courthouse, Cumberland Presbyterian Church, the Methodist Church, and the Female Academy shared the same fate. My own dwelling was saved by the exertions of a guard left by Colonel McMillan. There's really so much information that can be gleaned from these diaries. Information about ordinary men in these extraordinary times. Once again, all available at your local public library. I found that just cross-referencing the diaries and seeing the similarities in what the men faced could be fascinating, even if it was just them writing about what they ate today, what the rations were, just as exciting as what the fight that was going on. I encourage each of you to check out some of these items. I'm going to keep them over here for a little bit after the meeting. You can glance through them real quick. That's all I have for you this evening, but I hope that through some of these diary entries, you've learned a little bit more about Tippah County and her resilient people. Thank you.